Title IX, and in fact, perhaps it's no accident, it's the 40th anniversary. I mean, just absolutely marvelous. And, you know, has it made a difference? We actually have literature now that Title IX has been out on the ground long enough that we can make some different measurements based on the adoption of Title IX. Has it actually made a difference? And you betcha. Because of Title IX, there is well documented, we heard this earlier today, better grades, higher attendance at college and university, lower teenage pregnancy rates, higher self-esteem, and lower risk of obesity. We also know, of course, there are enormous benefits. And in Canada, I truly have such great respect for our female athletes that have gone out, and much like what I hear with USA Hockey and the national team, creating mentors within the program is incredibly important for young girls to show that women can compete, they can excel at the very best of levels. These are very, very important markers for us to remember. So now I want us to move into what do we know? So based on these differences, what have we been able to gather from the literature around what we, as a result of women now training more rigorously, regularly, in a demanding kind of way, what do we actually know about them? Now I'm going to take a bit of a stretch with you here. I mean, it won't seem like a stretch in the start here, but it might seem like a stretch by the end of the talk with you. I want us to imagine the idea of an injury. If we were to look up Webster's definition of injury or Wikipedia, whatever your sources are these days, if we think of injury, that it's a hurt or damage leading to loss of participation, loss of training and competition, removal from team or sport program, and an increased risk for re-injury, I think most of us in this room, we would automatically think, you know, we could agree on this definition. So I'm going to ask you to sort of hold on to these generic concepts of injury as we move through. Because if we understand now what is happening with female athletes and what will cause injury, and all of these fallout events as a result of injury, as with any type of injury management program, if you do proper surveillance and understand the risk factors why do these injuries happen, then we are much better off, because then we can start reducing risk. So what are they? Well, first of all, we've got a handful of what are called musculoskeletal issues. The anterior cruciate ligament injury, and I'm talking about the non-impact variety, very decimating for female athletes. Other knee area problems, patellofemoral joint around the IT band, also more often occurs in women. Shoulder conditions and concussion, which was talked about brilliantly this morning. Medical conditions include disordered eating, menstrual irregularities, and a handful of bone health problems, including things like stress fracture, osteopenia, or age-related bone loss and osteoporosis. Now, these three on the right collectively can be called the female athlete triad, and again, I'll give you some of the information on that in a minute. Because I often talk to parents and coaches, I'm trying to make language more friendly, so instead of calling them musculoskeletal injuries, I've called them mechanical injuries. They're kind of to deal with the hardware of the body. Medical conditions, and it was maybe who spoke about when we talk about menstrual irregularities, and no one wants to talk about that. My training after phys ed, I actually trained in reproductive endocrinology, so we would throw around all these kinds of terms which make a lot of people squirm. And I understand that, especially when the vast majority of our coaches are males, to talk about a female athlete's menstrual cycle will make many of them uncomfortable. They think they've got no business talking about it, and it makes them very, very nervous. So a lot of these issues around the triad have to do with eating and about how well balanced the energy intake is compared to the energetic demands of the sport. So I find when I talk about energetic injuries, we can then start to talk about, well, what are the consequences of some of these energetic injuries a little bit more easily. So the mechanical ones, and I again just give you some highlights here because there is a wealth of literature and information on each of these, and I'm just going to give you the snippet of them. So the ACL injury, and this is a wonderful poster which came out from the National Athletic Trainers Association, MVP, most vulnerable player, where we know that non-impact ACL injuries can afflict female athletes 4 to 8-fold greater compared to her male counterpart. And that is when we match those athletes in exactly the same sport, at exactly the same competitive level. So this is initially is very bad news, but it had led researchers to start to ask the question, well, why is this happening? And trying to understand what are these risk factors. And it is complex, very, very complex. It's some of the things, the factors we are unable to change. But after a relatively short period of time, I'm really pleased to say that there are effective ACL injury prevention programs. In fact, this was a recent systematic review which came out just this year. And it gives the details on the actual kind of program which can be implemented into a female athlete's program to reduce the risk of ACL injuries. Now, it's addressing only one of the factors. However, what they're finding along the way is that a lot of these neuromuscular training programs are actually aiding in reducing overall lower limb injury to female athletes. They're effective and successful. Now, the actual components of the program are still being debated, but when we start to look at the programs, variety of exercises, lower extremity plyometrics, balance, neuromuscular training, quadricep hamstring ratio, and the strength is particularly important. And I know there's a strength and conditioning coach in the back, so you probably are really well aware of this. However, I say that regardless of the sport that you're in, all girls need this kind of training. And again, if I'm going to come back to my physical literacy piece, establishing well-roundedness, young girls need to be exposed to this kind of training as well. The benefits, the literature is out there. We know it reduces significantly non-impact ACL injury. These are devastating injuries too. I mean, they're short-term as well as long-term costs of these ACL injuries. Has anybody in the room had an athlete with an ACL injury? Okay, and I know ACL injuries can occur due to catastrophic or trauma or high impact, but again, these non-impact ACL injuries are occurring simply when the girl is undergoing the usual duties of her game: deceleration, change of direction, jumping, landing. These are not unusual tasks that they're being asked to do. Now, athletes in general will not respond to good training by saying, this is going to reduce injury. That's not a real carrot for them. But the other added piece to this as well is that there are noted performance increases as well with many of these programs. So improved strength, jump, speed, agility, these are all available. Concussion, now again, that is another one which was talked about so nicely this morning. Again, what's going on with the female athlete. There's still much information to be had. And the only slide I wanted to talk about here is from a Canadian perspective. At our university level, it's the most common injury. And so talk about taking athletes out of action, if at all it could be prevented. And there is some work suggesting that, are they actually more prone? Do they not know how to body check? So there's, again, many more questions probably, but I'm delighted that the questions are happening. So now, the energetic injuries, again, very quickly. This is the tipping point here around eating. And again, as soon as I start to talk about food with girls in the room, the squirrely factor comes in, because women and food very often do not have a positive relationship. Now, in some sports it will occur more than others, but even the non-athlete is subjected to all types of social images and norms and body types that are driven by, again, these ideals which are rare to achieve. So women will manipulate their dietary intake to change the way in which their body looks. They will do it as a non-athlete, and they will also do it as an athlete. So what we understand about the female athlete triad is the tipping point is when intake does not match the demands of the training and the competition. If that is not matched, then the body's quite clever. When the body is in need of energy, it will dispose of physiological processes that the body deems not necessary. It's in survival mode. One of those processes which becomes dispensed of is the reproductive function. And within that, and this is just a cartoon diagram, but we also lose very precious hormone, estrogen. And when estrogen goes down, estrogen is what builds and protects bones. Those are the three. And that is the triad. Now this becomes very difficult. As I say, from a cultural point of view, we are not comfortable talking about the menstrual cycle. It's an uncomfortable topic. In fact, in some circles, it's taboo. And yet, there is a driven need for this because it is connected physiologically. And can it interfere with performance? Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, even when we realize that athletes, when they don't fuel themselves properly, there's all sorts of short and long-term consequences.